Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to start by thanking my colleagues and especially the Minister for Mining and Energy for the manner in which they have dealt with me, notwithstanding our disagreement on much of this bill. In particular, though, I want to apologise to the South Australian farming community. I have failed to convince the majority of my parliamentary colleagues of the methods, if not the merits, of treating you fairly. There is little doubt that the existing Mining Act leaves farmers at a substantial disadvantage, and this bill, if enacted, will exacerbate that situation. To be crystal clear, this bill will still result in farmers having mining exploration conducted on their properties, whether they like it or not. It will still result in legislative exemptions for mining on farmland not being worth the paper they are written on. It will still result in woefully inadequate compensation processes to the financial detriment of the farmer. There will still be no enforcement of the few rights farmers do have. The sad fact is that everyone knows this, but few care, or if they do, not enough to do something about it. Mr Speaker, Jackie Harrop is part of a fifth-generation farming family on the Yorke Peninsula. She is a South Australian just like us. Jackie is affected by this bill and by the current Act, and she has fought against exploration on her farm for the last 4 years. Jackie has, at the same time, battled against cancer. She has very publicly stated that she rates dealing with the mining, exploration and the associated court processes as worse than cancer. To be clear, someone who has dealt with the practical ramifications of the current Act, which this bill reinforces, rates that as worse than cancer. Worse. That is not an indictment of the mining sector or indeed of anyone else. It is up to us, the people in this place, to rectify this situation. We make the rules, the miners and explorers simply follow them. I want to stress that many of our mining companies, especially the larger, locally based ones, do go out of their way to respectfully interact with the farming community. That said, many of the exploration companies themselves are cowboys who do what they want to farmers and their properties, and they inevitably get away with it. This is not about being opposed to mining. It is not about some discussion about vetoes, and to suggest it is, as the member for West Torrens has, is at best oversimplifying matters. This is about inadequate access and compensation arrangements. There are several ugly secrets that I wish to canvass tonight, Mr Speaker. The first of those is that this bill is bad for farmers for a reason. There's no malice, there's just cold calculation by the department, who, after all, being fair, have a job to promote mining. The intention is to make South Australian farms the cheapest and easiest in Australia to access and exploit. That's why our legislation and its protections and compensation for farmers is the worst in Australia. It is designed that way. This is not just a crude attempt to provide an incentive for added mining activity. It's not just patently unfair to farmers, but it does not work. South Australia's share of the national mining investment spend has been in decline for at least the last decade, notwithstanding the fact that our farms are the cheapest and easiest to get to, and in the event that they are got to, that the compensation due is at best minuscule. This is an issue of long standing. It's an issue with the current Act, let alone the current bill, and it's bad for a reason. Ugly secret number two is that, in my view, Mr Speaker, this situation will only get worse. The primary zones for exploration in South Australia, based on previous data collected by the industry, includes large parts of the Eyre and Yorke Peninsulas. The South Australian mining industry has matured to the stage that all of the easily locatable and accessible mineral deposits have already been exploited. The industry is confident that there are vast amounts of mineral deposits still yet to be discovered in South Australia. The industry further believes that the bulk of new discoveries will be located deeper, that is to say with more overburden, and that as a result the only way they can be discovered is by way of drilling. That is to say, other less intrusive methods such as magnetic surveying, surveying via the air, will not work. That is, the pressure on landowners for property access for drilling by mining explorers will only increase here in South Australia in the next 5 to 10 years. More drilling obviously means more land access. This means more people affected by the inadequacies and inequities this bill perpetuates. Left unaddressed, this situation will therefore get worse, not better. That said, Mr Speaker, I want to very briefly cover, at the risk of reiterating or rehashing some of the points previously made. A group of us have unsuccessfully sought support for a range of amendments to this bill. Our aim was to take South Australia from being the worst state at protecting land access and compensation and instead using the best practices from other states and jurisdictions. The amendments have all been canvassed before, but they included stopping farmers being dragged off to court to force them to sign away their exempt land use without adequate compensation for their court costs. An independent inquiry along the lines of the one already publicly advocated and envisaged by both of the major representative bodies in this argument, the grain producers, GPSA, and the South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy, SACOM. The independent inquiry would be designed to assess alternative models and jurisdictions with a view to suggesting best practice ways to address the question of land access, aquifer protection and compensation regimes or methods. We also sought unsuccessfully realistic compensation methods and regimes as already used in other Australian states if exploration does go ahead and, as a result, there is damage to the farm. The member for Carvel pointed out, and I'd reiterate the view, the answers to a lot of these issues are in the legislation already in place in places such as West Australia, New South Wales and Queensland. It is possible to do better. I suggest we should. It's important that we should. So who really cares? Who really cares? Well, the people of South Australia do. They know injustice when they see it, and I've been heartened with the support of people generally, and in particular with the stance that we have taken. These people support the farmers' fight for some justice and better balancing between small farming businesses on the one hand, and on the other hand the mining bloc, which includes the Mines and Energy Department, its minister, and the miners and explorers themselves. South Australian people do support a better balance, a fairer balance between long-term food production versus the permanent loss of that food production or the destruction of our water aquifers in return for the transient exploitation of a small portion of our abundant mineral wealth. The farming community should know that they do have overwhelming public support, even if they don't yet have overwhelming parliamentary support. So what now? A group of us, me included, don't think it's unreasonable to want to have South Australia's mining, land access and compensation laws at least as good as those in operation elsewhere in Australia. Today, South Australia's mining, land access and compensation laws, in my view, are very deliberately the worst in the country, as an attempt to reduce potential costs for exploration especially, and thereby induce more mining operation investment. It should be stressed that, in my view, the Mining Department and the Minister are to be commended because their job is simply about promoting mining. They're just doing their job. The miners too are just doing their job, and to their credit, many of them, through SACOM, recognised the need for substantive change toward the bill, hence the SACOM call for a comparative review and adoption of best practice, exactly the same things that we've sought as well. The need for equity for farmers in this Act is the job of this parliament and its members. That's our job. It's our responsibility as MPs, in my view. I urge the farming community to continue the fight. You are used to overcoming adversity, and this will be no different eventually. I'm confident right will prevail. As my late father used to say, do the right thing and you'll be all right. I will close by thanking Nick McBride, Fraser Ellis and Dan Cregan for their support and friendship throughout this very long process. I join them in articulating my opposition to the passage of this bill, and I look forward to continuing to work with them to get a better deal for farmers and miners than the one we currently have before us.
Member for Mount